Hello, and welcome back to Analog Slop, where two music industry lifers revisit the NME and Melody Maker of their youth, which in our case is the 90s. We're exploring artists we discovered as wide-eyed teenagers, only to disown as sneering 20-somethings. Now, unshackled from our hipster baggage, we dive deep into the pre-digital age to look back on a time when music news came but once a week. My name is Graham Best. I've worked in music publishing and music tech for over 20 years.
And my name is Adam Bushell. I've been a music supervisor for 20 years.
Each week, one of us will read the NME, one of us will read the Melody Maker, and we will pick out the most interesting stories and discuss them. Join us this week for part 2 of our double episode look at the NME and Melody Maker from the 12th of March 1994. This week, we are overcome with a tidal wave of imagined nostalgia for legendary Scottish techno institution Pure and the enduring impact and legacy of its co-founder, JD Twitch. Then, we roll our sleeves up and tackle the flannel-shirted elephant in the room with the weekly's coverage of Kurt Cobain's overdose in Rome and Nirvana's last show.
Welcome back to Analog Slop. It is the 12th of March 1994. I have the Melody Maker this week. Graham has the NME.
I'm going to jump in there because something that only occurred to me while recording was this is actually the first time we've gone to 1994.
Yes.
This is uncharted territory for us in our relentless scraping of 90s music press news.
I have actually a theory on this. Obviously, we're buying issues from eBay. I think 94 is just quite an expensive year. I think, or rather, people have bought up a lot of those covers. I think there's so many iconic Oasis and Kurt Cobain death covers. I think a lot of the bulk collections and those single issues have gone, basically.
I would say there's 4 acts that have stuff going on in 1994 that would make for covetable issues from dedicated fans. You've got the Cobain overdose and the Cobain suicide.
Yeah.
You've got Oasis doing their first covers.
Yeah.
You've got Blur breaking through.
Yes.
And kind of having their success. And then, not on the same scale, but similarly possessed of obsessive fans, you've got the Manics in full Holy Bible, Richie Edwards mode.
Okay. Yeah. So I'd go with that. Speaking of Cobain, this week, the front page and lead news story concern Nirvana lead singer Kurt Cobain and his recent overdose at the Excelsior Hotel in Rome, which happened a little over a week before the cover date on this issue on the 4th of the 3rd, 1994. The front page headline reads, Kurt Cobain drugs drama, Nirvana star found in coma after overdose. We are teased that inside there will be the full story by Max Prestia?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Sure, it's Prestia. Full story by Max in Rome and Matt Smith and Everett True in London. The full story takes up the first 2 pages of the news section. The main article under the headline, Kurt Cobain rushed to hospital in coma, recounts the events in a moderately dry fashion. The article heavily leans on official sources, Geffen Records, Gold Mountain Management, hospital spokespeople, and Courtney Love herself are all presenting this as a medical emergency at this time, rather than a suicide attempt. The article is full of reassurance. The overwhelming tone is that Kurt Cobain has had a serious scare but will recover. We then get 3 box outs. What Rohypnol does to you, because he'd taken Rohypnol, but that's what he overdosed on.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that when I was reading the equivalent coverage in the NME.
Absolutely. Was it spelt the same way in yours? Like this kind of old-timey way of spelling Rohypnol?
Yeah, it was like...
I read it, I was like, what's that? Like, it's like Rohypnol, it's spelled.
It was spelt phonetically. It took me a while to get my head around what it was.
It's spelled phonetically, but without the H. It's Roipnol, rather than the way we used to. Anyway, there's that, which is a description of the drug that he overdosed on. There is a box out titled How Kurt Would Have Been Treated, which takes readers through a step-by-step of common drug overdose treatments. And most interestingly, an untitled opinion piece by Melody Maker journalist and friend of both Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love, Everett True. By coincidence, Kurt Cobain's wife, Courtney Love, had stopped off at the Melody Maker offices on the way to the airport to catch a flight to Rome to be with her husband. This issue also features her reviewing the week's singles, as compared by True. She presents herself as someone who was largely moved beyond drugs. In a pull quote, she declares, "I'm going to get healthy and start over. I don't even drink anymore because it destroys my stomach. My body wouldn't allow me to take drugs even if I wanted to." These words were spoken before the Rome incident, but appear in print after it. Close followers of 90s alternative music lore will know that we are very close to Kurt Cobain's suicide. He will die from a self-inflicted gunshot wound just over 3 weeks after this issue has been published on the 5th of the 4th, 1994. His suicide is not what we'll be covering today. This segment will be about the Rome incident. So, Graham, we'll both be trying very hard to stay on topic.
I took some summary notes of the NME's coverage because I knew you'd be covering this. There is a comment in that coverage that really unlocks the difference in relationship between Nirvana and Melody Maker versus NME. So yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, all right, let's do it. So, some background. Nirvana's third and most recent album, In Utero, was released in September 1993, which is the previous year. In October to December of 93, they toured that record in the US. We covered one of these shows in an earlier episode. They're well received, but Nirvana's shift into a slightly more corporate rock unit is met with suspicion. This was the on-the-ground 1993 opinion. I think a contemporary take, one less concerned with punk rock scene ethics, would be that these shows were frequently erratic, performed by a band clearly on the edge of self-destruction, but also frequently brilliant, featuring an expanded musical palette, as cellist for some tracks, and ex-Germs member Pat Smear added to the live arrangement as rhythm guitarist, second guitarist. This was a band that seemed to be evolving, even if it was falling apart. Our 21st century ears do not care whether they were selling out their punk rock background. Just actually on this, have you seen Nirvana live and loud?
No, I was just going to say, I haven't read any Cobain or Nirvana biographies, and I haven't seen an awful lot of live footage. So suspect there are parts of this puzzle I am missing.
Yeah, I mean, so Live and Loud was like a special shot for MTV. It was shot after Unplugged, and it was aired in kind of December of '93. You can get it on Blu-ray. There's actually like a lot of bonus TV clips on there from around this time, including one where they play in Rome in I think early February, so right up against this.
Yeah, yeah.
Honestly, I think if we sat down and watched this together, based on the kind of vibe read that we got from those reviews that we looked at, like in a previous episode, you'd be quite shocked. You wouldn't be like that everyone kind of sits around and the cello comes out and then we get like the quiet bit. They're just like pummeling through like their hits. They're like really voracious, intense kind of punk rock music. It has a reputation, Live and Loud, as their last good thing that they did, and I think that it really holds up. I actually watched it again over the week. It's really, really good, and in no way, shape, or form are you sitting there going, "Wow, this band's really mellowed." Like they destroy the stage and their instruments at the end. Chris Novoselic cuts himself so badly, like he has to leave almost immediately. When they start destroying things, it's just like literal puddle of blood, like in like around his base and stuff like that. And as I say, just blistering versions of "Serve the Servants" and "Scentless Apprentice," which is probably my favorite track on In Utero. Just gets an absolute like hammering. Basically, it's really good.
I wonder how much of the press sniffiness around this tour is less to do with the actual performance and more to do with the kind of the working reality of being journalists who maybe have previously enjoyed quite a high level of access. And then all of a sudden you're banging up against the fact that like this band is now a huge deal. I think I think in the review that you mentioned, like way back in an earlier episode, there were these kind of like cutting remarks about like the backstage like passes and how many layers you had to get through.
Yeah, which is crazy because the other thing that you get a sense of, if you've seen the documentary Montage of Heck, you get they're like it's like being in, you know, the Backstreet Boys or something in the mid-90s. Like, it's just like unbelievably intense love and pressure from the fans. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're just swarmed at all times when, especially Cobain, when he's like out of his hotel or whatever. Like, it's full on Beatles shit.
I know it sometimes sounds like I've signed a contract to plug this book every 4 episodes. But there is a really fantastic kind of contemporary paragraph in Stuart Bailey's The Song Is Nearly Over, recollecting Nirvana's gig at the King's Hall in Belfast in 1992, I think. And the backstage picture he paints from the perspective of 2025 is absolutely insane. Like, 2 teenagers sneak backstage with a puppy in their coat to show to the band. Courtney Love is running around backstage shouting, "This is amazing, someone get these kids cocaine."
Yeah.
It's a very vivid picture of, like, the madness of backstage.
That's it. It's a full on, like, intense insanity. So I'm not surprised that they had proper backstage security by this point. Anyway, so in February of 94, the European leg of their tour begins. These shows again are well received, although they're not without incident. The Melody Maker article speaks to a fan who was at a recent gig in Rome, one on the 22nd of February, and they described the concert like this. He sat down for a lot of the time, Cobain. They only played for 40 minutes, then came back on for a 20-minute encore. It was an awful concert, very weak and boring. This is interesting because thanks to the miracle of YouTube, the video of this gig exists in its entirety. So firstly, it's 80 minutes long. Secondly, and most importantly, is Cobain is clearly standing the whole time. I don't really quite know what to make of that. I don't know whether this is an invention. This unnamed fan is an invention of the Melody Maker who are trying to make a point. But this is something we covered before in that, you know, as somebody reading this in March 1994 would have no way of verifying this whatsoever, even if they were active on kind of nascent internet message boards. That's just like digital hearsay. Do you know what I mean? And most people would not have access to those. There's certainly no images or video to go with anyone's comments.
Honestly, one of my favorite genres of coverage we do on this podcast is taking kind of historical statements and then cross-referencing them with YouTube footage since uploaded.
Exactly. Yeah. You're like, hang on, that's not right. Either way, Cobain is visibly unwell. One fan tells the Melody Maker he looked quite pissed off at his gigs. It wasn't the Nirvana I knew. That feels like exactly the sort of quote that only becomes significant in hindsight.
Yeah.
His voice is deteriorating. He's coughing all the time. He looks pale and thin. Again, it's not surprising. At this point, he's suffering from chronic stomach pain, bronchitis, laryngitis, exhaustion, and of course, at this point, he's a full-on drug addict.
Plus, he's like spending 70, 80 minutes every night screaming. It's not like there's much in the way of vocal dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, there's, contemporary comments that I've read from both Pat Smear and Dave Grohl, where they basically say that he was actively pushing his voice as far as he possibly could and trying to wreck it every single night. I mean, laryngitis, bronchitis, and you're a smack addict. I mean, it's like your throat must be just absolutely screwed. And you're screaming, as you say, for 70, 80 minutes every single night. He's like, kind of looking for a way out. So at this point, he's lost in a haze of both drug abuse and withdrawal. As we mentioned, he's addicted to heroin. I mean, this is a drug that's not easy to travel with, and one that it's not guaranteed he'll be able to score when they arrive in a new country. So I think by all accounts, he's taking an involving combination of opioids and downers, including Rohypnol, which he'll eventually overdose on. I was going to ask you a question about how easy you think it is to score heroin on each stop of your European tour, but that makes it sound like this is something that you've done.
But to clarify for our listeners, I have not toured European cities looking for heroin. Again, stressing very firmly, I do not have direct experience of this. Um, I would suggest probably not that hard. The one that's always been legendary for people is when you go to Japan.
Okay. Yeah.
There is a long line of bands having awful, awful Tokyo and Osaka concerts because everyone is going cold turkey. There's quite a bleak interview that Mark Keds from Senseless Things did with a blog in like the late 2010s, where he talks about running out on the Wild Hearts and going and hiding in Tokyo. And in a very sort of spiky way, he's basically like, people say you can't get drugs in Tokyo. They don't look hard enough. You can.
Great. Chilling. So, also, his relationship with his wife is extremely strange at this point. He's convinced that Courtney Love is having an affair with Smashing Pumpkins frontman Billy Corgan. This is unsubstantiated. What is public record is that Cobain and Love frequently fight over each other's drug taking. The details of her heroin use are fudgy, but she is abusing prescription drugs at this point, something she references in the singles reviews. Reviewing the Madder Rose single Panic On, she says, "This reminds me of when I take those dihydrocodeines I get over here in London with the Rohypnol and a glass of champagne." Added to this are the pressures of a young family. The couple's daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, is around 18 months old at this point, and there's a mountain of professional commitments which eyewitnesses repeatedly claim were consuming him. Not least an upcoming headline slot at Lollapalooza, the remaining live dates, and an exhaustive world tour, and also a looming lawsuit over accusations of plagiarism by original Heart-Shaped Box promo director Kevin Kerslake, which is a story for another time. There is also the simple reality that Cobain no longer really seems to want to be doing this anymore. Dave Grohl would later recall that by the final European dates, Kurt just wanted to go home and appeared increasingly disengaged from touring. The Rome incident doesn't happen in the middle of a triumphant world tour. It happens during one that is visibly beginning to unravel. Cobain is depressed, paranoid, and exhausted. So I look back this week at the book that Everett True wrote on Nirvana called, I kid you not, Nirvana, The True Story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Inspiring stuff.
Yeah, which was originally published in 2006. In the article, the one written contemporaneously, the overdose is not described as a suicide attempt. Of the people that True speaks to for his book in 2006, some believe it was, others point to circumstantial evidence that seems to suggest something else. So let's look at the inverted commas facts. I'm going to put them in inverted commas because there's some competing narratives in both the article and the book. By the time Melody Maker goes to press, there are already two stories circulating. The first is that Cobain accidentally mixed alcohol and prescription medication. The second is that he attempted suicide. Almost everybody quoted in the article is arguing for the first explanation. True's book states that Courtney Love arrives at the Excelsior Hotel in Rome on March 3rd. Cobain is looking to reconcile and rekindle after weeks, months of arguing and disharmony. The suite they're staying in has been decked out in flowers and candles, and champagne is ordered to the room. Love seems to be on a different page, however. Once in their suite, she takes several sleeping tablets and goes to bed. Early the next morning, she wakes up to find that her husband is not in bed with her. She finds him in another part of the suite, unconscious on the ground. His eyes are open and there is blood coming out of his nose. He is fully dressed. In one of his trouser pockets is $1,000 in cash. In his hand is a 3-page note to Love. A hysterical Love calls Pat Smear and touring personal assistant / nanny / drug buddy Callie DeWitt into the room. Cobain is rushed to the nearby Umberto Prima Hospital where his stomach is pumped. He remains in a coma. Later that day, he's moved from the hospital to a private clinic. At Love's insistence, the news piece reports. And in the late afternoon, he emerges from the coma. According to True's book, one of the first acts is to scribble on a piece of paper, "Get these fucking tubes out of my mouth." After his condition stabilizes, he's discharged from the hospital 4 days later on the 8th of March. So the reporting. Geffen Records, their record company, and Gold Mountain Entertainment, their management company, put out a joint statement. They ascribe his hospital visit to the following: a complete collapse due to fatigue and severe influenza. Complications arose, they allege, after he had combined prescription painkillers and alcohol. Melody Maker does not have to buy this. This statement was released on the 4th. Days later, at a press conference at the hospital, doctors would be contradicting this, mentioning there were hypnol in his stomach. In True's book, he states that 60 tablets were removed from his stomach.
Wow.
Yeah. Also from True's book, the note in his hand apparently stated that I can't go through another divorce. As a child, he was deeply affected by the divorce of his parents. It apparently also contained the line, like Hamlet, I need to choose between life and death. I choose death. In addition to this, the note apparently contained the names of the people he suspected Courtney Love of cheating on him with. Unlike his actual suicide note, which was published, we cannot verify any of this. Courtney Love apparently threw this note into the fire after his death, where it exploded. Again from True's book, Pat Smear is one of the people who think that this was not a suicide attempt, wondering why he has $1,000 cash in his pocket and he was fully dressed. He described the note as a running away note. Yeah. I think he's fucked up on drugs and is doing crazy things that you do when you're fucked up on drugs.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was leaning. In between the general feel-good buzz on a Sunday morning of talking about this.
Yeah, exactly. Melody Maker is also not buying it. This is framed more as a case of coma. But by the way, when I say Melody Maker is also not buying it, Melody Maker is not buying the suicide angle, right? They're framing this more as a case of coma by misadventure. True's opinion piece states, rumors began circulating that this was a failed suicide attempt by the singer. Even bearing in mind that the original title of In Utero was at one point, I hate myself and I want to die. This seems to be highly unlikely. Drinking, driving fast cars, taking drugs, most everything pleasurable has risks attached. When you're getting fucked up, you don't care about the risk. So True at this point is, of course, 12 years away from publishing his book. He does not know that 60 Rohypnol pills were removed from Cobain's stomach.
Yeah, and he's deep in the Nirvana camp. I mean, he is the Nirvana camp to all intents and purposes.
Yeah. So his piece starts by assuring us that Kurt has largely left drugs behind, that he is positive, healthy, and looking forward to the future. We now know all these things to be false. I think True here is perhaps guilty of several things, all of which I actually find quite understandable and I'm sympathetic of. Number one, he's naively assuming the best for his friend in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Number two, he is blinded by the celebrity of this couple and his place in their world. In 1994, they are one of the most famous couples on the planet. Legend has it he introduced Courtney to Kurt. Number three, 90s alternative scene values as armor. In 2026, Kurt Cobain's peers would see him as a sick person that needed help. In 1994, this is the sign of True's piece. He says, as far as I'm concerned, if an individual wants to take drugs, drink, whatever, it's their own fucking prerogative and of no concern to anyone else. If Kurt Cobain wants to take Rohypnol, drink champagne, and go into a coma, it's up to him.
1994.
Yeah, worth noting that True was not a drug user and did not start drinking until his 20s. Also worth noting, Rohypnol was not the thing it is now. So, a bit of a postscript. Everyone involved thinks this crisis has passed. The doctors are optimistic, the management are optimistic, Courtney Love is optimistic, even Everett True is optimistic. The entire article is written from the assumption that Kurt Cobain has survived a frightening but temporary setback. 3 weeks later, he's dead. This feature does not foreshadow what happens next. It captures perhaps the last moment when people still believed things were going to be all right. To bring this up to a bit of a more recent reporting, in Brett Morgan's excellent documentary about Cobain, Montage of Heck, made in 2013, Courtney Love is interviewed extensively. And the climax of this film is actually the incident in Rome rather than suicide. That's where they end it. So Love talks about the incident being the result of her thinking about cheating on him. She says she never did. She had an opportunity in London, but never acted on it. She said, he must have been psychic or something because he knew. And the result was the Rome overdose. Director Brett Morgan asks, why do you think he chose to take his life? Because of rejection? She does not push back on the suicide framing. I think he would see it more as betrayal than rejection, she says.
Can I add a postscript?
Yeah, go on.
Ordinarily, we kind of stay in our lanes, but this is such a big story this week. I thought it was worthwhile rounding up the NME's coverage of this at the same time. I think I said earlier how, there was only one story in town this week and it was not reported entirely responsibly. So the NME's coverage runs to 3 pages. I'm just going to summarize like the headlines, the content, and some of the images used. So first up on page 3, when you open up the magazine, is the headline: "Kurt drug drama threatens UK tour." That is accompanied by a big half-page reproduction of the fairly infamous band photo, where the 3 members of Nirvana are lined up for the camera, and Cobain has what I think is an assault rifle,
Mm-hmm.
with the barrel in his mouth and his finger on the trigger.
Can I just jump in very quickly? Sorry, before we get into this, because you talk about threatening UK tour. For listeners that are either too young to remember or don't know, um, they've already played their last ever show at this point. Like in early March, they play Munich, right? And that's the last gig they'll ever play. So
Yes.
in terms of framing it as in, are they going to tour or not? This UK tour is cancelled while he's still alive, the UK dates you're talking about. But what no one knows is that this is it. Like, we are weeks away from the end. They've done their final everything, including playing live.
Because we're in paper tickets era, those UK tour tickets occasionally pop up on eBay.
Okay.
So yeah, we have that first page 3 image, with the threat to the UK tour headline and the really brutal photo. Then underneath that, on the kind of the bottom third of page 3, we have the not entirely sensitive headline: "Rockstar in a coma. It's serious." And that is the heading for what they describe as a timeline of 4 days that nearly finished Nirvana. And then moving on to page 4, we have another shot of Cobain on stage, with the headline: "Killing the pain, or himself." Now, this is where it gets interesting, which is what I alluded to earlier about the NME's relationship with Nirvana versus Melody Makers. This piece is a summary of Nirvana's management, Gold Mountain, and their label, Geffen, attempting to control the narrative around Cobain's substance abuse over the last few years. There is a particularly telling reference to a 1992 On the Road story by Keith Cameron in the NME that at the time highlighted the extent of Cobain's heroin use and the efforts to conceal it. This piece claims that Cameron wrote that article because he was genuinely upset and worried for Cobain, but that the consequence of the NME running that piece has been what the NME describes as a significantly strained relationship between NME and the Nirvana camp ever since.
Okay.
So yeah, that is intriguing when we look at the kind of relative coverage of the group between the NME and the Melody Maker.
Courtney Love is not reviewing the weak singles, basically.
She is absolutely not. Over on page 5, we have the headline: "I was determined to get habit." And that is a supercut of previous lurid quotes from Cobain and some from Love on his attitude towards drugs and his use of them. And then finally, within that, we have a box-in-box headlined "MTV, the show goes on," which confirms that MTV Europe went ahead with the European premiere of Nirvana Unplugged 3 days after Cobain's overdose. So, yeah, that's quite a snapshot of combined with what you've seen in the Melody Maker about how this was being covered at the time. Okay, let's wrap up 1994 for this episode. I have a piece that I was very close to not covering, but in the end, it was just too good an opportunity. So I will be covering the live review of Pure 2 at Glasgow Barrowlands.
Which I briefly mentioned.
Yes, you did briefly mention this. I wasn't going to cover this for two pretty fundamental reasons. First is that in 1994, I was a 14-year-old metal and alt rock kid and was not remotely aware of underground techno, let alone the Scottish scene.
Yeah.
The second reason was that I figured finding additional material on Pure beyond it was great and everyone was off their tits would be, as is common with a lot of UK electronic music history outside the M25, pretty challenging.
Yeah.
In the end, I decided to ignore all that and crack on, largely because it's an opportunity to talk a little about someone who had a fairly major impact on both of our musical tastes in the early 2000s.
Correct.
And that is the much missed Keith McIver, better known as JD Twitch, who was co founder and resident of Pure, and who would go on to form the hugely influential DJ duo and club night Optimo Spaccio in the late 90s, and who passed away last year. Adam, we have made allusions to them previously, but for the benefit of our listeners, would you like to speak on the impact Optimo had on you?
Yes, I would.
Yes, I would like to speak on that.
Let me just form some definitive thoughts on something I wasn't thinking about 5 minutes ago.
I know you love a good ambush.
As is the format of our podcast. I think I've had the idea of what it means to have eclectic tastes redefined for me several times in my life. When I was probably the age that I would have been reading the NME at this time in 1994, eclectic taste to me was the fact that unlike my friends, or unlike most of my friends, I listened to indie music, I listened to kind of indie adjacent metal music, and I listened to hip hop and I listened to pop music, and I had a burgeoning interest, but didn't really know how to get a toe in like dance music. I thought that was the kind of the height of eclecticism. Then when we get to 1997, which we covered before, I think both me and our tastes are starting to broaden even further as the kind of what's being reported on in the weeklies is also broadening, but also their kind of remit isn't satisfying our kind of musical hunger. And then when I went to university, that broadens even more when you meet people who are from all different parts of the country and indeed the world who've grown up listening to completely different music to you. And you're kind of all educating each other on your kind of different areas of expertise. And f- not finally, but where the doors really get kind of blown off is two things happen, which is that when I leave university and get a job as a music supervisor, you have taste, but preference just completely goes out the window because you're listening to so many different types of things because you have to. But also simultaneously to that is the introduction of Optimo into my life. I'm struggling to think about how I first discovered them. I would assume it was through you. So I didn't have the How to Kill the DJ Part 2 compilation. I feel like you had that before me, and maybe from there we went and saw them live, but basically they rapidly became mine and possibly our favorite DJs, not only through multiple appearances where we saw them all over London, but also through the kind of mixes that mostly Twitch used to drop on their website, which were educations in things like exotica, avant-garde jazz, but also he had a particular favorite of mine was the Pure mix, which he did, which you're going to talk about, which was the kind of records that he played at the Pure nights in Glasgow, such as you say, this kind of R&S records style techno and bleep stuff and stuff like that.
My memory is that before I owned any of the mix CDs and before we'd seen them play out, I think a blog I followed, there was possibly something to do with and did we mention our disco club night?
Yeah.
I think they had booked Optimo and in advance they were like, hey, check out these mixes they have on their blog. There was stuff like winter camp and summer camp
Oh, yeah. God.
and stuff. From memory, like I think I found those mixes and like shared them with you. And like, my God, these are amazing. And it just went from there.
We saw them at Plastic People, right? I think that's the first time we saw them. Actually, my future wife was there briefly. I think it's one of the first times we met as well. And Yeah, it was amazing. Like, it was I mean, Plastic People anyway is like a it's like a cramped, like, sweaty basement, and really felt like a fire hazard, that place. Like, I really like if there was a fire down there, everybody would have been killed.
God, I love that place.
Yeah.
I spent so much time in there.
Yeah. They played things out that you just wouldn't hear anyone else play. There was this kind of like a dance music classicism mixed with a kind of alternative history of dance music that certainly, like, ignorant plebs like us would kind of only dimly becoming aware of, mixed with here's some interesting new records which you've never heard. I don't know, I just never heard anyone mixed like that before. Do you know what I mean? And also technically they were amazing.
Yeah, I think, like, the fact that they were a bit older, but also had, like, they weren't kinda, like, pinned into any particular sound, meant that they'd been on the ground long enough where they were pulling records out from different scenes and micro genres.
Yeah.
And, like, you're right, like, there would be a degree of dance music classicism. So, like, there would be a common thread that you recognized, but then there'd be total left turns thrown in that, like, were just absolutely mind-blowing.
Well, also for people our age who missed the early 90s clubbing, right? Or late 80s, early 90s, we'd never heard Come Together played out. Do you
Mm.
know what I mean? Or anything like that. Like the single mix, obviously. Like, which I remember hearing, I think they almost ended with it. I think actually they ended with was the 808 State track.
Oh, Cubic.
Yeah, Cubic, thank you. Yeah, they ended with as I remember, they played Come Together, then they played, like, the first bit of Cubic and then just stopped the music, and that was kind of their ending. Around that point when we were going clubbing, it was all kind of contemporary stuff, a lot of kind of blog house adjacent things, and it was all very fun, but it was like you every time you saw them, not only did you have an amazing time, but you felt like you should be taking notes because, I think something that he mentioned either in an interview or, like, maybe on his blog or something like that, JD Twitch I'm talking about, is that he was, really into electronic music throughout the '80s, and he said I can't stress enough what an odd thing that was to be. Do you know what I mean? Like pre-dance
Mhm.
music. He'd followed electronic music on the timeline that most people had kind of either left it behind or just weren't interested in. They said this vast amount of knowledge to draw on.
Yeah, I think, Twitch would always speak quite convincingly about his love of and interest in, like, some really pretty confrontational experimental music.
Yeah.
But out of those scenes, so, like, your Throbbing Gristles and your White Houses and stuff like that, you'd get these funny little spin-off records that kind of preempt, like, major movements later. So I think the big one that he became quite associated with was a Chris and Cozy
Mm.
track for a TV show. There's like a spin-off of a spin-off of Throbbing Gristle called Dancing Ghosts. That track is absolutely amazing and literally just sounds like Chicago House, but it's from like 1984, for a BBC documentary.
Chris and Cozy is a great example of one of the acts that you kind of associate with him in that they actually, when they were around, they had a fair amount of visibility. That they weren't a huge band by any stretch of the imagination, but neither were they like so obscure that nobody would have heard of them. And yet, by the time we fast forward to when we're going clubbing or when they're putting Chris and Cozy tracks on their compilations, like they've just disappeared into the ether of popular culture. Do you know what I mean? It's just like no one is thinking about acts like that, when they were sort of starting to promote them.
And that's why the next Optimo will be playing Carter USM.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true.
Optimo were very, very much like of Glasgow, but they really came to prominence beyond Scotland from the 2000s onwards. So yeah, the knowledge we were unlikely to ever cover them like here with our focus on the 90s. And the sheer surprise of the fact that, firstly, a review of a Pure Night made it to the NME gig reviews, and secondly, that they'd held it in Glasgow Barrowlands. That was enough motivation to get us in the episode.
Okay.
So, a quick summary of Pure. It was run out of Edinburgh, most consistently at a venue helpfully called The Venue, from 1990 to 2000. by founders and residents Twitch and Brainstorm. Pure was, and I quote, Scotland's first bona fide techno club, and for the first 6 or 7 years, it was possibly the best club of its type on the planet. That quote is from a 2005 blog post on the Optimo website by Twitch. So it turns out that there is a fair bit of documentation about Pure, and it's by Twitch. So this blog post is a pretty great summary of what Pure is about, so I will be quoting from it extensively. Like I said, that initial impression that there was like minimal documentation of Pure isn't really correct. I think it's more accurate to say that there's been this slow but steady increase in recollections and info over the last 20 years, which, as we'll come to find, is impressive considering the amount of memory damage this club inflicted on people.
Yeah, yeah.
Twitch goes on to qualify his best club in the world statement by pointing out that at the start, most people who came had never heard loud electronic dance music before, and boy was it loud. In the early days before we started to fear for people's well-being, Pure was probably the loudest club on the planet. The monitors for the DJs were more powerful and louder than most other clubs' entire sound systems. For me personally, like, this idea excites me greatly. Like, I know like you have less appetite for this, but I'm a huge fan of physically impactful volume. However, that's not all Pure had. Twitch writes further about Pure having the most incredible lighting that pretty much became the blueprint for, air quotes, rave lighting. In a split second, the club would go from a sensory overload of every color imaginable firing at you from every direction to complete darkness punctured by banks of what we called terror strobes that were so intense that it was literally impossible to move from the spot where you were dancing until they went off again. Then there was the smoke. Multiple smoke machines on full blast for minutes on end until the fog is so thick that you can't see anything at all. If you held up your hand to your face, you wouldn't be able to see it. We went through liters and liters of the stuff every week. Brief aside here. Smoke machines, dry ice, whatever you want to call it. I'm sure there must have been like unforeseen consequences for people's health, but I always felt we missed the peak of irresponsible smoke machine deployment. Like, we were just that bit too young, but whenever I'd be in a space that like was willing to use them, it would add so much to the vibe.
I love the idea that they're just physically assaulting the people on the dance floor.
Well, back to Twitch's account. Finally, there were the drugs. The start of Pure pretty much coincided with the arrival of ecstasy in Scotland. So, all these factors combined, the fact that this music sounded like nothing most people had ever heard before, the volume, the intensity of the lights, the smoke, and the drugs, and people's minds were literally being blown. The only way to describe what the atmosphere in there was like is beyond. It was scary. Every time a new record was mixed in, the screams were so loud that despite the ear-shredding volume, the screams would drown out the music. People would be climbing onto and even into the PA system. There were times when the whole dance floor would become one massive group hug. A certain Detroit legend who DJ'd there one time was so freaked out by how mad the atmosphere was that he decided he couldn't play anymore and I had to take over. It was truly revolutionary. Now, let's all take a deep breath and attempt to reconcile ourselves to the fact that we were not and will never be there.
Also, that we did not and never had any kind of cultural event similar to this. Well, we completely missed this. Like, it actually used to really infuriate me. I've kind of dealt with it now, but like the idea that we didn't get anything really first, we just got variations on things that had already happened.
Yeah, pastiches of
Yeah,
like
exactly,
the
yeah.
20th century's greatest hits.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
So, if we can attempt to come to terms for that, we shall now attempt to place this live review into that context. This was a show that transplanted the Pure Night from its usual base in Edinburgh to its somewhat grittier neighbourhood, Glasgow, for an all-nighter at the infamous Barrowlands venue. In the words of Fiona Shepherd, reviewing this night for the NME, the sweatiest night out in Scotland decants to Glasgow's grubby Groove Palace. Adam, I've never been to Glasgow Barrowlands. I'm pretty confident you haven't either. But in the absence of lived experience, are you aware at all of its kind of bare-knuckled reputation?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to plenty of what I would call grubby groove palaces. That's
That's the sign on your house.
yeah. But no, I've never been to Barrowlands, and but yes, I know it has a reputation for. I mean, Scotland generally has a reputation for pushing things a bit when it comes to partying. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, maybe infamous is a bit strong, but, like, Barrowlands has this kinda long cultivated reputation for, like, an unforgiving, intense crowd.
Mhm.
Like, support bands are terrorized, like, underinvested headliners are, like, ruthlessly and instantly critiqued.
Yeah.
But if you're an act who's on their A game, then, like, the energy levels are, well, legendary.
Okay.
Like, artists speak in, like, hushed tones of the audience and artist rapport. There is a 90-minute BBC Alba documentary
Oh,
that captures this phenomena titled The Barrowlands Roar. Like, no one is making a documentary about Brixton Academy.
no.
It's a special venue with a particularly strong relationship with capital R rock music. So, getting into the review, Twitch and Brainstorm are on warm up duties. The review dismisses those warm up duties pithily by suggesting that they are saving the happening platters for such a time when all the guests have arrived.
Quite possible.
Yes, that's sort of the point of being a warm up DJ.
Yeah.
There's an early slot Dutch duo called Exquisite Corpse. My notes read in all caps, "Do not do what I did and try to Google this act."
Yeah.
And they are criticized for, and I quote, lack of visual embellishment and limited appeal to the feet. These complaints in the review kind of continue by way of comparison. So Andrew Weatherall's set is described as perfunctory when removed from a context of following Exquisite Corpse. And then there's a bit of a kind of, yeah, a bit of negative framing around what sounds like a dangerously overcapacity main room that was hosting the set by B12, the ambient act. Obviously, that main room has been renamed the Sonic Womb because it's 1994. There's then a vibe shift because Speedy J and Richie Hawtin start their set. They're described as whipping the assembly into some kind of shape before Twitch and Brainstorm return to to what's described as deal with the unfeasibly durable remnants of the crowd. Speaking of durable, it blows my mind that Richie Hawtin is such an ever-present part of this world.
Can I say as well, Richie Hawtin, this is not Richie Hawtin of 2026. This is Richie Hawtin 1 year on from releasing Sheet 1. So
Yeah.
this would have been full on nosebleed techno of the highest order.
Punched in the face 160 times a minute.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than, this is not criticism, but rather than the kind of polite, stylish, minimal techno, which he's kind of more known for now.
I mean, to start your career with like borderline like child prodigy status and to still be going nearly 40 years later as like an institution, even if I don't have any interest in the music, he kind of makes some plays anymore. That's still a hell of an achievement.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, getting back to the review, it's not particularly glowing, but to my mind, it's coming for a place that reads disappointed regular rather than the more standard, like fish out of water indie kid snark
Yeah.
might like anticipate from NME. So I find it fascinating that this review gets run in the NME's live reviews alongside Carter USM, like Manic Street Preachers and Therapy. And it gave me a bit of a kind of reminder that despite some of the generalizations we sometimes fall victim to, these papers were not at this moment in time like the kind of focus group monocultures they'd become by the early 2000s,
Yeah.
which is a very, very clumsy segue for me to talk further about the early 2000s. Pure continued till 2000 despite enormous changes to the electronic music scene. Twitch described the impact of these changes in another interview, possibly a blog post, I think, in the following year from the previous one in 2006. It says 1987 to 1994 was a golden era of innovation in electronic dance music. While many great records came out in the next few years after that, by the mid to late 90s, it seemed the originality and diversity in sound had more or less dissipated, and a lot of the music being produced was fairly uniform and all about how hard it was. That's when I decided I had to start Optima. For what it's worth, I don't entirely agree with that assessment. Right? That description might fit techno and
Mm,
how that scene was sort of calcifying around brutalism.
yeah.
But the diversity of the drum and bass scene and the kind of mutations that were starting to spin out of that, things like early broken beat and two step in UK garage, like I, I think there's still a lot of like really like exciting things happening beyond techno.
Yes, although this is an older man with firmly established taste at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so yeah, I don't think he's being snobby, but, he certainly didn't have fixed ideas about what is and is not appropriate, but he maybe was just like, "This is nothing to do with me." Do you know what I mean? Like, if as you say, like, if he's doing talking about drum and bass or whatever, I can't imagine him playing a drum and bass record. I'm sure he must have done at some point.
I mean, well, we'll get into it.
Nor can I imagine him playing Rockefeller Skank or something. Do you know what
Now that I am very confident never happened. um, that critique of late '90s dance music, he expanded on that in a 2012 interview with the DJ Wugs blog, and it narrowed his critique to techno specifically. He speaks there about, I think the club was amazing up until around 1996, 97. But by that point, techno had become so defined that we were really stuck in this ghetto musically.
Mhm.
The people that were coming just wanted to hear this banging, pounding tech music, which we hated, but we couldn't go anywhere else because that's what they wanted to hear. We were too scared to stop it because this is what we did for a living, and we didn't know what to do next. I wish we'd been brave and gone, that's it. But we kept doing it for exactly 10 years. We stopped it on its 10th birthday, whereas we should have stopped a lot sooner. That speaks to a tension I really enjoy prodding at, which is, what does it mean to work in a creative field where youth and spontaneity play such a major role? And how do you interact and participate in that field as your own youth and capacity for spontaneity recedes?
I wouldn't know.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is a bit more personal to me as someone who kind of aged out of working in electronic music.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Twitch continued DJing to this devoted worldwide following, and he was running labels that were a home for challenging music and unconventional artists until his death at 57. Like I said, my own experience of this part of the aging process was like a slow withdrawal from going out until one day you kind of realize it's been months since you've been at a club or kept up to date with what's new and exciting, and that you don't miss it and you really enjoy waking up early and not feeling like shit.
I used to miss it all the time. And actually when people would talk about it or I would talk about it, there was kind of like a bit of a real ache to the fact that I was kind of realizing this was a part of my life that was over. Do you know what I mean? But
Mhm.
now when we talk about it, it just it just kind of makes me feel tired just talking about it, to be honest.
I think that the bit for me is that if I ever have any pang of kind of nostalgia for it, I imagine what it would be to do it now and
Mhm.
what that would actually look like and entail, and I shudder and the thought leaves my body.
Many times I thought I could go to like one of those early shows at Printworks or something. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I never have gone back. The last time I went proper like clubbing, like out, and I would say like had a proper night. And actually, that night we saw JD Twitch play. So, I mean, something else we should mention is that both me and you worked with him professionally in different capacities, not extensively. I wouldn't say I knew him particularly well, but certainly we had many warm email exchanges. I spoke to him on the phone many times, and yes, he came into my office several times as well. Yeah, very nice guy, and very tolerant of people like, I guess, me and you, who were much younger than him, probably seemed a bit stupid and naive. And I certainly wasn't fawning with him, but like, I pretty much was every idea that he had. I was like, "That's amazing." Do you know what I mean? It's probably when we worked together. So I'm sure that's probably a bit grating.
This is a really embarrassing recollection. I don't come out of this well, but my main memory of my interactions with him is Fabric has shut. It's 7 a.m. in the morning, and a bunch of us are sat up in the balcony bar
Mhm.
after a hard night's work, all chatting. And Twitch is sat there. He's got me on one side of him, and he's got one of my colleagues on the other side. And we are having a very heated, not hugely articulate argument about whether dubstep is better than grime, or
Yeah.
grime is better than dubstep, and we are insisting that he referees the argument for us. He was a very patient man. That's what I'll say.
He was a very patient man. You're right.
So, if you want to get an idea
Sorry,
of
sorry.
what
How did that debate end? How did that? I need closure on that. What
you
was
think I
this?
can remember how that debate ended? He was. I think he was. I think he was quite. He strove to maintain dignity and rise above it.
Okay.
I think he felt like both scenes had value.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So, if you want to get an idea of what Pure was about, and frankly, who wouldn't after some of those descriptions earlier, there are some live recordings of sets floating around online, including a couple from 1991. These recordings should be caveated by Twitch, who describes his DJ trajectory thus. Although I started DJing in 1987, I didn't start mixing records together until 1990, and I couldn't afford turntables until the end of that year. So initially, when I was DJing at Pure, I was literally learning on the job. Thankfully, this word's going to do some heavy lifting. The euphoria of those times, coupled with the fact that it was also new and exciting to so many, meant that I got away with it, as audiences were a lot more forgiving than they are today. So rather than those 1991 recordings, probably a better place to get a sense of what was happening in Pure's golden era is a pair of Twitch mixes from the 21st century. The first of these is one that Adam mentioned earlier, which is simply called Pure Mix. It's a 40-minute must listen that is still up on optimo.co.uk. It is offered with the wonderful qualifier, apologies for some of the records sounding a little rough, but Pure was a tough environment for vinyl, which I can absolutely believe after those earlier descriptions. And if you want to go deeper, there is the absolutely fantastic Raise Your Hands If You Understand mixtape, which was originally released in, I think, 2021 as a limited run cassette, but is still available on the Optimo Bandcamp as a pay what you want download.
Nice.
That builds on the previous mix to get into some extended explorations of the micro genres that were particularly beloved of the Pure crowd, and is, yeah, that's a wonderful mix. Final word inevitably goes to Keith McIver himself, again, writing in 2005 and articulating a philosophy that I think was very clear to both of us and anyone who followed the kind of music he played and supported. People always ask, was it better? The answer would have to be no. I genuinely believe Optimo is now one of the best clubs on the planet because we have one of the best crowds on the planet. I'm kind of relieved that the total madness of the early 90s has subsided somewhat. I will cherish those days forever, but I'm not a nostalgic person. I don't buy into the whole it was better back in the day thing. It wasn't better. It was just different. And I'm glad that I have the memories and managed not to lose my mind, even if the same thing can't be said for my hearing. Analog Slop will return next week with our first visit to 1991. Join us for the first of 2 episodes, taking in the sights, sounds, and words of the NME and Melody Maker the week of 14th September. There we'll be discussing De La Soul's difficult second album and Billy Bragg's unexpectedly transatlantic profile.
In the meantime, you can find us on socials at most of the usual places. You can find us on Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all under the Analog Slop name. All one word, spelt ANALOGUESLOP. If you prefer your podcast to involve static pictures, we're also on YouTube. That is youtube.com/@analogslop. That is ANALOGUESLOP. And finally, if you want to send us an email, we're reachable on analogslop@gmail.com.